The next part of Unit 2, we're going to look at inheritance. Inheritance is the passing on of specific traits from parents to offspring. The instructions on how to manufacture these traits are found on chromosomes. Chromosomes consist of individual units of information called genes. Gregor Mendel is considered to be the father of genetics. He was an Austrian monk and worked with pea plants in the 1860s. Mendel's model of inheritance was compatible with that of evolution. He believed that various combinations of traits are tested by the environment, and that these combinations lead to Mendel worked with garden peas. Garden peas are very easy to grow, and the generation time is 75 days versus 18 years in humans. Each pea seed equals an embryo, which grows to be an adult plant. Pea plants normally self-pollinate, but they can be cross-pollinated by hand. Mendel chose true breeding varieties. True breeding varieties, the offspring are identical to the parents and each other. Mendel looked at 7 pea plant characteristics: seed shape, color, flower color, pod shape, pod color, the location of the flowers, and whether the plants were tall or dwarfed. Mendel analyzed over 10,000 crosses, and he's kept very detailed records of his results. Let's look at the structure of a flower. Pollen grains contain sperm, which is produced in the anther. When pollen grains are brushed onto the stigma, the sperm fertilizes the eggs in the ovary. These fertilized eggs develop into seeds, which are located in the ovule. Pea plants can be allowed to self-fertilize by putting a bag over the plant, or 2 plants can be crossed by cutting away the anthers on one plant and then using a paintbrush to brush pollen from another. Mendel's theory of particulate inheritance is based on the existence of minute particles. We now know these minute particles to be called genes. These genes are physical units that are passed from parent to offspring. In one-trait inheritance, you're looking at the inheritance of just one trait. The original parents in a cross are known as the P generation or parental generation. Descendants of the P generation would be the first generation, or the F1 generation, which represents first philo, philo being Latin for son. Crossing members of the F1 generation then generates the second generation of offspring, or the P2 generation. Mendel crossed purple-flowered plants with white-flowered plants. In the F1 generation, all the plants had purple flowers. Had the trait for the white flowers disappeared? Punnett squares show all possible combinations of egg and sperm that the offspring may inherit. On the outside of the square, you indicate the genes that are found in the parental plants. And the inside of the square gives you the genes' genetic makeup of possible offspring. When the F1 generation was allowed to self-pollinate, this created the F2 generation, or second phylogeneration, where 3/4 of the plants had purple flowers and 1/4 had white flowers. So the F1 generation had passed on the gene for the white flowers. Given this 3-to-1 ratio of purple flowered plants to white flowered plants, Mendel reasoned that this is only possible if the F1 parent had 2 copies of each of these heritable factors, one for white flowers and one for purple, and that one of the factors was dominant and the other was recessive. These factors separate when gametes are formed, which means each gamete, either sperm or egg, contains only 1 copy of each factor. Phenotype is a physical expression of a trait, and these are transmitted by alleles. Alleles are the alternate forms of a trait that exist. So if we were looking at the color of the peas themselves, in this case, the allele is either for yellow or green. Capital letters are used to represent dominant alleles, and lowercase letters are used to represent recessive alleles. Notice that in this trait, the same letter is used for both, a capital Y for yellow and a small letter y for green. So you would not use a small letter G at that point. The phenotypic ratios, or phenotype. The phenotype is the physical expression of the gene, or what the physical outcome looks like. So in this case, with this cross, it would either be yellow pea seeds or green pea seeds. Where the genotype is what the genes tell you. And this gives you the exact genetic makeup of the offspring. Chromosomes occur in pairs. You receive one from your mother and one from your father. Human body cells have 46 chromosomes, arranged in 23 pairs. During the formation of sperm and egg cells, each gamete, or sperm and egg, randomly receives one chromosome from each pair. When fertilization occurs, that gives rise to a new organism that has 2 alleles for each trait. Alleles or alternate form of the gene are what choices occur. For pea plant height gene, there are 2 alleles that exist, tall or dwarfed. For seed color, the alleles are yellow or green. There are some traits that have more than 2 alleles. For instance, human blood types, the alleles are A, B, or O. Alleles are located on homologous chromosomes. Homologous chromosomes are not identical, but contain the same traits in the same order. You receive one homologous chromosome from your mother, the other from your father. Loci describes the exact location of a particular gene. This diagram shows a pair of homologous chromosomes. I'll be really sexist and say that you got the red from your mother and the blue from your father, and you'll see that the genes are the same. However, one might be dominant, the other might be recessive. Remember, dominant alleles are represented using a capital letter, recessive alleles a lowercase letter. Mendel's principle of dominance states that a dominant allele is expressed over a recessive allele. Or you can word it this way: recessive allele is masked or hidden by the presence of a dominant allele. Again, genotype is what alleles are inherited, or what alleles an individual receives at fertilization. And there are several modes of inheritance. You could inherit 2 identical alleles, in which case that's designated as being homozygous. Zygous referring to a zygote, the name given to a fertilized egg, and homo meaning the same. A trait can be inherited as homozygous dominant, you receive both dominant alleles, or homozygous recessive, receive 2 recessive alleles. If an individual inherits 2 different alleles, one dominant or one recessive, that's referred to as heterozygous, hetero meaning other. Phenotype is the physical expression, a physical appearance of an individual, and this is mostly determined by genotype. There are some environmental factors that may affect phenotype. We'll go into more of these later, but just now some examples. Height is also affected by an individual's nutrition. Your skin color is affected by your degree of oxygenation and whether you've had sun exposure. Let's look at some other genetic crosses. In mice, black fur is dominant over white fur. Cross a heterozygous mouse with a homozygous recessive mouse. The first thing you need to do is determine what letter you're going to use to represent your trait. Since dominant fur is black, I chose capital B for black, and then the recessive trait for white fur would be given a little b. And the question asks you to cross a heterozygous mouse, should be hetero meaning other, capital little b, and a mouse that's homozygous recessive. That's represented little b, little b. So again, remember, on the outside of the square, you're going to have the alleles or genes that are found in the parent. And remember that the law of segregation states that gametes that are produced contain only one allele. Okay. So the center is all the possible genotypes of the offspring. So all you do is combine letters. Okay. Always write the dominant trait first, followed by the recessive. And you'll see that we establish a 1-to-1 ratio of dominant to recessive offspring. Okay, it's actually 2-to-2, right? Two boxes represent mice with black fur, and 2 boxes represent mice with white fur. So you could say 2-to-2, but just to simplify it, we say a 1-to-1 ratio. Anytime you cross a heterozygous individual for a trait with an individual that is homozygous recessive, that will give you a 1-to-1 ratio. In humans, having 6 fingers is dominant to having 5. Just because a trait is dominant, that doesn't necessarily mean it's more prevalent in the human population. If 2 heterozygous parents have children, what is the ratio of 6-fingered children to 5-fingered children? So again, we can use capital F to represent the dominant trait of having 6 fingers, lowercase f for representing the recessive trait of having 5 fingers. I always like to use letters where the capital letter and the lowercase letter look very distinctively different. Okay. So here we have a child with 6 fingers. Here we have a child with 6 fingers. Here's another child with 6 fingers. And this represents a child that has 5. So similar to some of the earlier problems that we looked at with Mendel and the purple and white flowered, there's a 3-to-1 ratio of 6-fingered children to 5-fingered children. Whenever you cross 2 heterozygous individuals, doesn't matter if you're talking about flower, color, or the number of fingers, you will always get a 3-to-1 ratio of dominant to recessive. It's also possible to do 2-factor crosses, where you look at the inheritance of 2 traits together. For instance, if you took plants that had 1 allele for yellow-colored peas and 1 allele for green, and looked at in addition, the trait for the coat type, whether wrinkled or smooth, you could then establish what gametes be produced by this cross. As you see, this is a little bit more complicated. You have to keep in track of all the possible combinations of gametes from these heterozygous parents. So you could have gametes where the offspring inherit both dominant trait, 1 dominant recessive, 1 dominant recessive again, or both recessive. In crossing parents that are heterozygous for 2 traits, this would establish a 9-3-3-1 ratio, where 9 of the possible gametes have both dominant traits, 3 have 1 particular trait dominant and the other recessive, the next 1 recessive, 1 dominant, and the 1 representing the probability of having offspring that inherit both recessive traits. Another law that Mendel established was that of independent assortment. And this states that each pair of factors or alleles separates independently of another, and this enables a large combination of factors that can be found in the individual gametes. This is demonstrated in the previous slide where we looked at the two traits together, and you saw that increased the number of squares or combinations of gametes that are possible. Let's look at some genetic diseases found in humans. The first category of disorders we'll look at are autosomal recessive disorders. As we mentioned before, humans have 23 pairs of chromosomes. The first 22 pairs are known as the autosomes. The 23rd pair as the sex chromosomes, where females are XX and males are XY. So an autosomal recessive disorder is a disorder found on one of the autosomes. Remember, in order for an individual to demonstrate a recessive trait, they have to inherit one recessive allele from each of the parents. This is a very unique disorder, infantile neuroaxial dystrophy, or NAD. It's only found in one population of individuals in the world, and that's in the Bedouin tribes. It's due to intermarriages within one's family, tribe, or clan. All individuals have harmful recessive alleles, but the chance of you passing it on to your children is very low because your partner would have to have the same, have to carry the same recessive allele. But when individuals have the same grandparent or great-grandparent, there is a chance that both of you inherited the same recessive allele. Another autosomal recessive disorder is Cohen syndrome. The three Byler sisters were all born with a condition that has no cure and mysteriously leads to severe mental retardation and a host of physical problems. Recently, doctors figured out that the girls have a gene for something called Cohen syndrome. There are only 100 known cases in the world. This has resulted in intermarriages within the Ohio Amish population. In this region of Ohio, the population, these are Amish children that do actually attend public school. The Amish make up only about 10% of the population, but are half the special needs cases. Albinism is another autosomal recessive disorder. It's actually a group of inherited disorders where an individual produces little or no melanin pigment. Melanin is a brown pigment that gives coloration to your skin, your hair, and your eyes. And it almost acts as a switch. So an individual may genetically be predispositioned to very dark skin, but because they have melanism, it's almost as though the switch is turned off and they don't produce any of the pigments. Yes, the child shown here in the picture is related to the woman that's holding him. That's his mother. So while genetically he would have quite dark skin, because he's albino, he produces very minimal amounts of melanin pigment and has very, very pale skin. Let's look at some autosomal dominant disorders. The difference here is that an individual only needs to inherit one allele from one of their parents to have this disorder. Huntington's disease is an autosomal dominant disorder that affects neurons in the brain. The disease is caused by a mutant copy of a gene coding for the Huntington protein. Unfortunately, there is no treatment available for the disease, and once it strikes late in one's life, it is fatal within 10 to 15 years. Let's look at another mode of inheritance, incomplete dominance. It's not a blending of inheritance. Pink flowers can have red, white, or pink offspring. So in this case, the heterozygote, or the flower that receives one of each of the allele, has an intermediate phenotype. So in 4 o'clock flowers, you have red, which is dominant to white, but the heterozygote will be pink. Another example of incomplete dominance are in human individuals that have wavy hair. Wavy hair is an intermediate between having curly hair or straight hair. So it's not an actual blending, but it's a separate or intermediate production or product. With codominance in flowers, on the other hand, the resulting offspring between red and white parents would not be pink. Instead, there would be red flowers with white spots, or white flowers with red spots, as a result of both colors being codominant. Another example of this is in horses. If you cross a chestnut horse and a cremella, almost white-colored horse, the heterozygous horse will be a blending of both colors, where you'll have a horse with a golden tan color with lighter manes and tails. Such heterozygous horses are known as palominos. There are some other traits that are inherited as multiple alleles. This is where more than two alleles exist for the same trait. But remember, each individual only have two alleles. It's just that there are more alleles to possibly choose from. An example of this is A-B-O blood groups. A person has only two of the three alleles. Notice that whenever we're discussing anything that is not kind of straight dominant or recessiveness, a superscript is used. So in this case, you have the letter I, and the superscript A or B are used to indicate the A and B allele. A and B, however, are dominant to O, so O is represented using a smaller case, I. But A and B are co-dominant to each other, so you may have heard of an individual that has AB blood. So a person could have A blood, B blood, O blood, or they have one A and one B allele. That would be an example of codominance, or AB blood. This chart is showing the inheritance of ABO blood system in humans. Individuals that have type A blood could inherit two A alleles, or an allele for A and an allele for O. Remember, the lowercase I represents the allele for type O blood. A person that has B blood could inherit both B alleles, or an allele for B and one for O. Individuals that have type AB blood inherit one allele for A as well as one for B. And to have type O blood, you need to inherit both recessive alleles. Don't worry about that in terms of blood transfusion, because about 45% of the human population has type O blood. A woman with type AB blood marries a man with type B blood. If they have children, what are the possible blood types for these individuals? Let's look at the answer for a minute. Remember that the child is going to inherit one allele for each. So a child could inherit in A from the mother and a B from the father. Possibly the father has two alleles for B, so the child could inherit two B alleles. The child can inherit in A from the mother, and perhaps the father is a carrier of the O allele. So in this case, they could be B and O, okay, or an A allele and the O allele, and be A or O. So this is possible blood types, since we're not exactly sure in the case of the father of whether he is carrying two B alleles. Oops, this is like really sloppy. Okay, or one for B and then the other allele being that for O. In polygenic inheritance, this means that more than one set of genes is involved in the inheritance of this trait. Each dominant allele has a quantitative effect on the phenotype, and these effects are additive. These multifactorial traits are often subject to environmental effects. Examples of polygenic traits are cleft palate, diabetes, schizophrenia, allergies, some types of cancers, height, weight, and intelligence. So the effect of the genes plus environmental factors affects the overall outcome of this particular trait. If you looked at a population of college students and ranked them by height, you would see this bell-shaped curve, where a smaller percent of the population would be short, another smaller percent of the population would be tall, and most individuals are within mid-range. Skin color is polygenic. The more dominant alleles that are inherited, the darker an individual's skin tone. Here we have a slide where we have parents that are of mixed ethnicity. There are about 7 genes that control skin color, or 40 genes which can be added together. This gives you a wide range of skin color from very pale to very dark. They have their one daughter that inherited about the same amount of dominant alleles displayed in both parents. However, their other child inherited all the recessive alleles. This is about a 1 in a million chance of this occurring. So even though the two girls are twins, not identical twins, their skin tone is very different. There are other environmental factors that can affect skin color. One is degree of oxygenation. Someone that perhaps has a heart condition, may look very pale as their body is not adequately supplying their cells with oxygen. The amount of sun exposure. Sun exposure stimulates the production of melanin, which causes tanning. And other health factors such as jaundice. Jaundice is accumulation of bilirubin, which is a yellow color pigment that can actually contribute to a yellowish shade of the skin as well as a sclera, white of the eyes. This is usually caused by some type of liver disease. Some traits are inherited on either the X or Y chromosome, so these are referred to as being sex-linked traits, or the mode of inheritance is sex-linked inheritance. Females are XX. All eggs that are produced contain an X chromosome. Males are genetically XY, so it's the sperm that either contains the X or the Y. If you look at the picture below, the X chromosome is much larger than the Y chromosome, so most genes are found on the X. For a trait that is inherited in this way, the gene is only on the X and not present on the Y. So in that case, males only have one allele on their X, where females have 2, one on each of the X's that they inherit. Hemophilia is an X-linked recessive disorder, and this is a mutation of protein that's required for blood clotting. Let's look at all of these possible combinations of males and females and whether they are hemophiliacs, normal, or carriers of this trait. When looking at traits that show or demonstrate this mode of inheritance, it's important to keep track of whether the individual is a male or a female. So as you'll notice that there is not an allele found on the Y chromosome, since the allele is present only on the X. If you have a female that has both normal alleles, then she does not, she's not a hemophiliac. A female that has both recessive alleles would be a hemophiliac. Females can also carry one normal and one recessive mutant allele and be a carrier of hemophilia. Okay, with a male, there's only 2 options that can occur. Either he inherits one dominant allele from his mother and he's normal, or inherits one recessive allele from his mother, in which case he's a hemophiliac. Mate a normal female with a hemophiliac male. Would they produce any hemophiliac daughters or any hemophiliac sons? The initial way to set this up is to indicate the presence or occurrence of the X and Y chromosomes. So here we have the mother, okay, which we said is normal, and the father, which we said was hemophiliac. So see here, they could have a daughter that's a carrier, a son that is normal, another daughter that's a hemophiliac, or another son that is normal. For this reason, hemophilia and other X-linked recessive disorders are often referred to as the trait a mother gives her son. One of the X chromosomes would have to have the recessive allele for hemophilia in order for one of the males, or one of the offspring that are boys, to inherit this trait. This is a pedigree chart of the monarchy of Great Britain's Queen Victoria. A pedigree chart shows inheritance of a genetic disorder over many generations. Females are represented with a circle, males with a square. Individuals that have the particular genetic disorder are designated by the colored-in shapes. Since hemophilia is an X-linked recessive disorder, you would expect to find more males to be affected than females. You can see most of the affected individuals on the pedigree chart are males. Something of historical significance on this pedigree chart is it does show the family of Russian Tsar Nicholas II, who were all executed during the Russian Revolution. Marfan syndrome is a genetic disorder characterized by abnormal production of a connective tissue protein called fibrinogen. Fibrinogen is found in all the organs of the body, so this abnormal form has a wide variety of effects. Isaiah Austin was a basketball player at Baylor. He was drafted into the NBA. At that time, a complete physical makeup identified that he had Marfan syndrome. This had not been detected through high school or even college. Some of the characteristics which this abnormality has in regards to the skeletal system is individuals are usually very tall, have very loose joints, a long narrow face, and very long fingers, arms, and legs, which is all really good for playing basketball. Some of the effects of the heart and blood vessels can include enlargement of the aorta, which Isaiah Austin was determined to have, which can lead to an aneurysm. This is where the aortic wall tears and can cause death. Effects to the eyes include severe nearsightedness. So if you can see in the picture that Isaiah is actually wearing a pair of glasses while he's playing basketball. He did have some stretch marks that were identified in high school or earlier in his life. However, there wasn't one doctor that connected all these things together. It was felt that it would be too hazardous for him to play at the NBA level. He's currently coaching college. Another example of pleiotropy is sickle cell disease. This occurs when an individual inherits two alleles for sickle cell hemoglobin. Sickle cell hemoglobin has one small mutation in the amino acid sequence that causes the hemoglobin molecule to change shape or sickle under instances of low oxygen demand, which can occur when the individual is very ill or stressed. In individuals that have sickle cell disease, also known as sickle cell anemia, the amino acid glutamic acid has been replaced with the amino acid valine. Hemoglobin molecules that come out of solution, causing red blood cells to sickle, can't fit through capillaries. This causes a restriction of blood flow to organs. This can cause severe abdominal pain, can also cause joint pain. Red blood cells that sickle are also broken down, and this leads to anemia. Watch this video on the evolution of sickle cell disease. Let's look at sex determination in humans. Females contain two X chromosomes. Males, one X and one Y chromosome. The female egg or ova always contains an X chromosome. It is the sperm that either contains one X or one Y chromosome. During the first 5 weeks of embryonic development, male and female fetuses are essentially the same. It's at this point that if the fetus contains a Y chromosome, this turns on the SRY gene. The S or Y gene secretes testosterone, and this leads to the development of the male primary sexual characteristics, testes and penis. The X chromosome is much larger than the Y chromosome. It contains a multitude of genes that are not found on the Y. If a male inherits a recessive genetic disorder found on the X chromosome, this disorder will be displayed. A female having two X's would have to inherit two copies in order to display this disorder. Let's look at a slightly different situation. We'll work on this question together. The mode of inheritance in this problem is X-linked dominant, and we are asked what are the possible genotypes of the individual marked with the star. So here we have a couple, male and female, and the female has the disorder. So looking at this, we know that she has to have one of the dominant alleles in order to demonstrate this trait. She has two offspring, two daughters. One does not inherit the allele, however the other does. This leads us to conclude that she has to carry one dominant and one recessive allele. Her daughter did not inherit the trait over here, inherited the recessive form. The daughter that did inherit the allele inherited the dominant form.